guys, it's Lazarus here, and we're coming back to you with another video today. Today we're going to be talking about deep learning super sampling from NVIDIA, or DLSS. Recently, a couple days ago, NVIDIA announced that they were supporting, or that Battlefield 5 was going to be having deep learning super sampling added to it. So this was from February 15th from NVIDIA's website. They are adding support for DLSS for Battlefield and Metro Exodus. I have Battlefield 5, so today what we're going to be doing is looking at how DLSS affects the performance in-game of ray tracing when it's enabled. Specifically, what we're going to be looking at today is whether DLSS makes a difference when you're using 1080p. When I enabled DLSS on my RTX card, the first thing I noticed was that it mentioned, this is only really going to benefit you, I'm paraphrasing, this is only really going to benefit you if you're using graphically intense resolutions, which my assumption would be 1080 would probably not fit into that category. But that's what I have, and that's what I know a lot of you have. So today I'm going to look at what DLSS does for performance when you're gaming at 1080p. In all of these videos, I'm going to be using the same setup. I have an EVGA RTX 2070 made by, obviously, NVIDIA. That's the graphics card. I'll have the other specs for the PC listed below with the exact products that I'm using in this testing. Also, in the top left corner, in each video will be the frame rate will be displayed, and that is being done by MSI Afterburner. The benchmarking I'll be doing is going to be done using Fraps, and I'll have a link to that in the description below as well. What I'm going to be doing is looking at frame times and average frames per second, which I'll compile all of the data and make a couple graphs that I'll show towards the end of the video, so we can see the cumulative analytical comparison between the different methods that we're using, which today we're going to be comparing 3 different options. We're going to be using ray tracing turned off, we're going to be having ray tracing turned on with DLSS, and we're going to have ray tracing turned on without DLSS. For all of these videos and all of these runs, we're going to have the settings on ultra as high as they can go in Battlefield 5. Enjoy. We're playing Battlefield 5. DLSS is on, ray tracing is on and set to ultra. In the top left, I have my MSI Afterburner overlay, so you can see the frame rates as I'm seeing them. So let's see what kind of frame rates we get with DLSS enabled. Alright, so what we are doing on this run is we are doing ray tracing is enabled and set to ultra settings. So we're going to play through this. We're going to take a little benchmark during gameplay using Fraps, and we will look at the graphs and see what the frame rate was like using this setup. All right, so the settings we have it on now. Let's look at that. Options, video, advanced. We have ray tracing off, and every other setting is maxed. Alright, so now that we've looked at the gameplay data, let's go ahead and go through the data analysis. So this is a slide, or this is a graph showing the frame count on the X, or the bottom axis right here. So this is the frame that was rendered throughout the benchmarking that I did. On the Y-axis, or the vertical axis, is the time in milliseconds each frame took to be rendered. The green line is the RTX off. The yellow line is RTX on, but with DLSS enabled. And the red line is RTX on with DLSS disabled. So in this slide, the lower is better. So the less amount of time it took to render a frame, the better. And that's what the green line is showing right here. Also, you may be wondering why the lines are different lengths. And that's because when there's a better frame rate and it's taking less time to render the frames, over the same amount of real time, more frames are rendered. So with RTX off, it rendered nearly 20,000 frames, whereas when RTX was on, it was more like 10,000 frames throughout the benchmark. So here it's clearly showing that RTX off, or having no ray tracing, enables the GPU to render frames much more quickly because they're less complicated, obviously. And then also, we do see a slight increase in performance here from the DLSS being enabled, even though we're just using a 1080 panel. This is a figure showing the average frame rates throughout the entire benchmark that I did. So the green, again, is without ray tracing, with ray tracing off. The red is with ray tracing on, but the deep learning super sampling turned off. And the yellow is ray tracing on with DLSS on. What you probably notice is that RTX does come at a massive frame rate cost, which has been pretty well documented. But what we're seeing here, again on a 1080 panel, is an increase of nearly 10 frames per second, and also going above the magical 60 frames per second for PC gamers. It's not a lot of frames, but if you look at the math on that, it's a nearly 15% increase in performance in terms of frame rate. That kind of pales in comparison to the the increase in frame rate you get by just turning ray tracing off. So it's 105% or more than a doubling in frame rate by having ray tracing turned off. So what are the conclusions then from this test that I did? Ray tracing is absolutely beautiful. It is amazingly gorgeous. Hopefully you could tell in the side-by-side videos that I put up that the ray tracing is very clearly demonstrated in the reflections. It's very noticeable. The reflections are extremely vivid. It's an amazing technology. It's very nice. DLSS, as far as its ability to increase your performance with ray tracing, that technology is still really in its infancy, but it is already providing up to 15% performance improvements on my machine with a 1080 resolution. Now, what I will say is that is technically a significantly increased performance using DLSS. But whether or not it was perceptible is another question. I can tell you that where I did perceive a massive difference was turning ray tracing off. The gameplay was much more smooth, and we had more than a doubling of frame rate. And that's very easy to distinguish when you're playing. However, going from 50-ish frames per second to 60 frames per second isn't as noticeable of an increase in terms of performance. But like I said, the vividness of the reflections was clearly demonstrable. Like, it was very obvious the graphics quality increase. So with that, I'm going to wrap up. My question to you is, what do you prefer? Do you prefer better graphical quality or higher frame rate? It's sort of a fine line between the two. You have to choose one or the other. It's really hard to have both in one package without spending tens of thousands of dollars, or at least thousands of dollars. So with that, I will conclude. If you liked what you saw here today, feel free to leave a thumbs up. If you didn't like what you saw or disagreed with what I had to say, leave a thumbs down and leave a comment down below and let me know what I could do to improve my content. Also, make sure you check me out on Twitch. I'm streaming almost every day on Twitch as well, playing these actual games and having a lot of fun. So have a good one. If you have an Amazon Prime account, you can get a free Twitch Prime subscription once a month. So if you have Amazon Prime and you're not using your Twitch Prime subscription, look into it and come back to Lazarus Online 007 on Twitch and use that little guy, because it's just going to waste if you don't.